Pokemon, you know it, you love it. It's one of the biggest, most popular franchises in the world, and they are everywhere. They have games, they have trading cards, they have TV shows, they have movies, they have toys and cafes and toothpaste. We're getting off track here. Let's focus on just their games. Pokemon has one of Nintendo's biggest staple franchises since the days of the Game Boy. Incredibly fun, easy to pick up and play games where you can go around collecting little monster creatures and make them fight in battles for money. Why do we like this again? I'm kidding. I've been playing Pokemon since I was a kid and I love this franchise. I have vivid memories of sitting in the back of my parents' car on my way to my grandparents' house playing Pokemon Crystal. One by one, collecting gym leader badges with Cyndaquil. I would play it all day and all night, taking advantage of every passing streetlight as I got closer and closer to being the very best. Only for my Game Boy to die and realize I hadn't saved in about 5 hours. A very important lesson was learned that day. As the years went on, Pokemon's games evolved and moved from one gaming console to the next. From the N64 and the GameCube to handhelds like the DS and 3DS, all the way up to the Nintendo Switch, where there's a whopping 12 different games fans can play. So in the 28 years since the first games came out and the billions of dollars in revenue that the Pokemon Company has brought in, you'd think that Pokemon would potentially be one of the biggest, best looking, most powerful games that the industry had to offer, right? Nope. Instead, we are treated to some of the glitchiest, ugliest, most bland, and uninspired games that the Switch has to offer. But year after year, game after game, these are some of the highest selling games on the eShop. And look, I'm not saying there's no fun to be had in these games. Like I said, I love Pokemon. Despite all the flaws and issues, I still look forward to picking up the newest game when it comes out. Underneath all that buggy, flat, lifeless mess is a core gameplay that is quality, but we deserve better. So, hi, I'm Matt. I like to talk about video games, pop culture, and pretty much anything else that piques my interest. Some of my fondest childhood memories are of playing these games, and it's something that I come back to time and time again because I genuinely enjoy playing them, even the most recent of games. Even when dealing with some of the messiness and issues these games have, I still find them so charming that I keep coming back for more. But this is Game Freak we're talking about here, okay? We aren't talking about some little indie developers or a small team of game designers. We are talking about Pokemon, the highest grossing franchise in the world. It's brought in more than $113.7 billion. Yes, billion with a B. That's more than Mickey Mouse, and it's not even by a small margin. So with all of this money, I think it's fair to expect a little more than just a charming franchise. I think it's fair to expect something of genuine quality, something that feels complete on release day, something that looks and feels impressive to play. So today, I wanted to set some time aside from being a Pokemon fanboy and really air out my grievances. Pikachu, please cover those big yellow ears of yours, because we really deserve better Pokemon games. Pokemon started out as just two simple 8-bit graphic games in 1996. Eventually making its way from Japan to the rest of the globe in 1998, the games were received extremely well for their gameplay. As the generations changed, Pokemon's graphics received updates as well, jumping from 8-bit to 16-bit to 3D models and environments, to where we are today. Now, I'm not going to sit there and pretend like Pokemon is the pinnacle of video game graphics, or a pioneer in game fidelity, but there was a point in time where it seemed like the Pokemon Company was actually trying to make their games look unique. But take a look at where we are today. Reusing assets, low quality textures, horrible pop-in and draw distances, and bland, boring, uninspired environments. In all fairness, people aren't playing Pokemon games to get absorbed in the world around their characters. They just want to catch Pokemon. I mean, it's the main catchphrase. Gotta catch them all, right? But on the flip side, some people want to get lost in their games' worlds. Some people want to explore an immersive environment, traverse around every inch of the game's universe, or examine every detail about the lore of the game. Obviously, the Pokemon are the main draw. I'm not trying to argue that. But again, we are talking about the most profitable franchise in the world. They clearly have the money to afford making a few tree assets. They can afford to design a world that looks and feels immersive, that looks inviting to explore, and just looks visually interesting. Now, I don't think that all of the Pokemon games on the Switch look bad. Most of them? Debatable. But I do think that there are some personal exceptions for me. Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee are probably the best looking traditional Pokemon titles. The Pokemon themselves look really good in this game, and so does the environment. And New Pokemon Snap is just the best looking Pokemon game, period. I know it's a smaller game that's on rails, but all the Pokemon in this game genuinely look fantastic. And there are some spots in the game that are really incredible to look at. I even like Pokémon Legends Arceus, which I know has issues of its own, but I like the cel-shaded art style in this game, and the sky kind of makes it look like some kind of painting or something. I don't know, I just really dig Arceus. It's probably my favorite out of all the Pokemon games on the Switch. For most people, the games are the main draw for the Pokemon franchise. The card games, animes, and merchandise all get inspiration from each new video game. On top of that, so many of these are incredibly high quality. The shows, from the anime to the stop motion series, are done beautifully. The art for the cards is always exceptional. And have you seen some of the sick looking statues and figures that have been made over the years? I've got this cool little Machamp because he's my guy. But look at some of these other ones that are just so cool looking. I mean, it's so awesome to look at. I'm getting off track again, I'm sorry. There are so many awesome, highly detailed, beautiful looking products coming from the Pokemon Company. So why are we settling for janky, low quality games? Now, I don't necessarily know percentage-wise how much of Pokemon's revenue comes from just the games, but I'd like to believe that if the games were higher quality, the good reception would then trickle down to the rest of the business. Cards, anime, merchandise, they'd all get some kind of boost because everyone loved the new game and the new Pokemon. I get it. The Pokemon Company makes so much money that they can just have Pikachu fart out a quick game and the fans will pre-order it regardless. They can trickle that quality down to the cards and the fans will still scramble to the nearest GameStop to buy them in bulk. I understand the mentality that Pokemon just doesn't need to try because they're pretty much guaranteed to succeed. But why not try to make something great? Why not try to make something unique? If they have all of these hardcore fans, why not allow them to feel rewarded? A mentality that a lot of people seem to have is if the games are fun, the visuals don't matter. And that's generally one that I agree with, actually. And I think that that's something that's kind of carried throughout all of Nintendo's games. As long as the gameplay is good, sure, I can live with not having top-of-the-line visuals. And while I do think that the core mechanic of Pokemon works well and is fun to play, that doesn't make the gameplay good. I can find bits and pieces from Scarlet and Violet that I genuinely have fun playing. I like catching Pokemon, I like battling Pokemon, but everything surrounding those core mechanics, from the world it takes place in to the overall stability of the game, it's not good. It's broken, it's busted, and it took getting a $450 console to fix those issues. So everyone still playing on the OG Switch is just shit out of luck. I mean, take a look at some of the other games that have come out on the Switch over the course of its lifetime. Breath of the Wild, Mario Odyssey, Xenoblade, Animal Crossing, Tears of the Kingdom, Pikmin 4. I mean, the list goes on. Let's take a look at one specific game, Breath of the Wild. This was the very first game to release on the Switch, releasing on its launch day, and it was praised for its visuals. Now compare it to something like Red Dead Redemption 2 and sure, there's a clear winner. But it's the art style that makes it so impressive. It's sort of a Wind Waker situation. Because of its cel-shaded art style, Wind Waker still holds up incredibly well over 20 years later. And I think people will look back on Breath of the Wild in 20 years and say the same thing. Now, is it possible that it was held back by the power of the console it ran on? Yeah, sure. But if anything, that's even more of an achievement of what it was able to accomplish on the Switch. So why shouldn't we want that for Pokemon? Why shouldn't we want a carefully thought out game built from the ground up? Why shouldn't we want a game that can be looked back on in 10, 20 years from now and have people still impressed with how good it looks? Breath of the Wild had that jaw-dropping moment where Link walks out into this new, expansive open world for the first time. And it's just so iconic. It's what people literally refer to as a Breath of the Wild moment. Why don't we want a Breath of the Wild moment for Pokemon? Especially now with the games like Scarlet and Violet being open world games. I guess what I'm saying is I want people to be able to look back on newer Pokemon games someday in the future the same way that we look back on so many Pokemon games of our past. I look back on those original Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games so fondly because they're kind of products of their time. Like, the Game Boy wasn't a necessarily powerful console, all things considered, but they got a pass because it was portable. And even with that in mind, the Pokemon games are looked back on as some of the best games from that generation of gaming. I mean, it was a powerhouse. The same could be said for the DS, and even the 3DS. I don't think anyone was looking at those games and saying, that's what should represent gaming in this generation. These were portable games, and they were judged as such, so people generally had a much more positive view on these. But with the Switch, and now the Switch 2, there's kind of a gray area. These games can't necessarily be judged anymore as just portable games, because now we're talking about consoles that have the power of an Xbox 360, and now roughly a PS4. So now customers are viewing these a little differently. Now, when you have a game that's barely holding itself together, yeah, people will be a little more harsh. People will be a little more critical. And why shouldn't they be? When these games cost $50, $60, $70. I just think when people look back on so many of Nintendo's first-party games for the Nintendo Switch, they will be able to say, wow, this is what the Switch generation was like, or this is what a great Switch game is like. I don't think anyone will be looking at the majority of what the Pokemon Company released and say that. And I want so badly for me to be wrong, but I don't think I am. If anything, I think people will look at these games and instead say, these are the limitations of the Switch generation. And I just don't think that that's true. But this is a sign that Game Freak and the Pokemon Company are just struggling to create high-quality games. Moving from something like the 3DS to the Switch is a significant jump in quality and in expectations. And I just don't think Game Freak were able to successfully capitalize on that jump. And now, here we are at the end of one generation and the beginning of a new one, with one last Pokemon game releasing. Pokémon Legends Z-A. And I'll give credit where credit is due. This game does look better than something like Scarlet and Violet. The resolution and draw distances are definitely improved. There's no jagged edges, and overall, the game looks pretty decent, especially when running on the Switch 2. But again, I have to stress that saying something looks decent from the most profitable franchise of all time is not a good thing. This should look great. It should look exceptional. It should look outstanding. Decent doesn't cut it. I don't feel like I'm moving the goalpost with this. I mean, take a look at the corners that were cut just to get a decent resolution. Flat buildings, reused assets, and boring textures. I mean, seriously, all these buildings have balconies, but they're just JPEGs. Not a single building has any real depth, any real architecture. They just all feel like cookie cutter, copy and paste buildings. And in a game where the entire thing takes place in a city, there's absolutely nothing unique about it. And you can tell that this game takes place in the Kalos region and not in Pennsylvania, because there's not a single crack or pothole or a blemish in any of those roads. In other words, there's no texture. And every NPC is just standing like statues. Now, Scarlet and Violet had NPCs that could walk around and breathe some life into a fairly empty game. But because of all the game's pop-in issues, they would just kind of disappear. So rather than fix that issue, Game Freak decided to plant the NPCs in place and make the game feel soulless. Again, a game that is supposed to take place in a big, bustling city, and everyone is just standing there. Now, let's be honest here. Most people aren't paying attention to this kind of stuff. Like I said, we just want to catch Pokemon. And I will say that if there's anything that makes this game feel like it's full of life, it's the Pokemon. These little guys look great as always, and the battling mechanics look genuinely thought out. And even the character designs for the main characters look really great. So I guess this isn't completely soulless. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh. After all, I have had plenty of compliments for what Game Freak has shown us from Legends Z-A. Better resolution, better draw distances, great Pokemon and character designs, and a very cool combat system. And maybe they'll prove me wrong. I hope they do. I genuinely hope I'm eating my words in a week from now, and I will happily admit that I was wrong and give the Pokemon Company their flowers. So I guess the burning question in my mind is, where do we go from here? I mean, we know the issues that are going on, we've talked about them extensively, but it's easy for me to sit here and complain, but what's the solution? I don't know, I'm just a guy who makes YouTube videos. Look, when it comes down to it, I think Game Freak and the Pokemon Company as a whole really just need to figure out where their priorities are. They pump these games out so quickly because the games usually come with a TV show or comes with a new collection of cards, and they are all in production to pretty much release all at the same time. If they slow the development of the game, then it stalls the shows, then it stalls the card packs. Everything gets pushed back. So the obvious question is, why not just slow down? And yeah, that's exactly what they should do. Take an extra year to work on these games. Hell, take an extra 2 if it means that the final product will be something to be proud of. Plan around the longer development times. If you think that this game will take 2 years to do, then plan it for 3 just to be safe. Plan your show around that. Plan the cards around that. Or don't. Release the new card pack ahead of the game if you need to. Air the new episode if you have to. People aren't going to not buy the game just because they saw what the newest evolution looks like on a card. People aren't going to not buy the game just because they saw the new region in the anime. People aren't going to not buy the game just because they saw the new legendary in a coloring book. And I think that right there is the biggest issue. People aren't going to not buy the games. Because like I've said again and again, at the end of the day, people just want to catch Pokemon. They just want to play the new game. Especially kids, they don't care about the graphics and the frame rates and the draw distances and textures and all of that. They care about the cute little Pikachus and other creatures running around. Like I said earlier, I grew up playing Pokemon games on the Game Boy. And back then, they were just little sprites. There were no Pokemon walking around the world, you just kind of found them. But that was all I cared about doing. I didn't care much about the story. I don't think I could name a single character other than maybe Professor Oak. I just cared about catching them all. And I think that that's something that is in common with today's kids. And I think that the Pokemon Company knows that. And they know that whether the title is a piece of garbage or a Game of the Year contender, it won't matter because people will still buy the new games anyway. So why bother putting in the effort and putting in the resources when it's just easy money for the taking? But I think that that's the mentality that they really need to change. The kids that were playing on the Game Boys grew up, and we can look back on those games even today and still have a good time. The kids that were playing the Game Boys, they had kids. And someday, those kids will look back on these games, and maybe they won't be able to say the same. Maybe when those kids have kids of their own, they won't introduce them to Pokemon. Because there's a better, more quality title out there. maybe this will all have a trickling effect, and Pokemon won't be able to fix their mistake until it's too late. Or maybe none of this means anything and life goes on. I guess what I'm trying to say is when I play Pokemon games today, yeah, I feel nostalgic and I generally have a good time. But for a lot of people, that magic is starting to fade. We just want to feel like we did when playing the original games as kids. Now we have to worry about, I don't know, taxes. So much of what draws people into Pokemon is nostalgia. But when that nostalgia fades away, what are we left with? Making sure the games are quality, not just for us, but for the generations being introduced to video games for the first time. It makes sure that everyone is having a good time. And in turn, everybody keeps coming back for more. But tell me, how do you feel about modern Pokemon games? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. If you like this video, please give it a like, and be sure to follow me on all of these social media platforms. But whatever you do, I just want to thank you for watching this video. I'll likely be posting a follow-up video once Pokémon Legends Z-A comes out, so be sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell to keep up to date on all of my latest videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.